Denise, I don't know what to do. They want a father figure there. Theo doesn't have one. I don't have one to give him. Mr. Kingsley, I'm sorry. I was just finishing my...
How long has your son been asking for a father?
It's not your concern, sir. I'll handle it.
Odette. Sit down, please. I'll go. Tomorrow. I'll stand with your son, if you'll have me.
Sir?
I'm not asking you. I'm offering.
Odette Vaughn had exactly $40 in her purse, a son who needed a miracle, and no one left in the world to call for help. She stood in the kitchen of a house that wasn't hers, scrubbing a pot that cost more than her monthly rent, and tried not to let her hands shake. Because tomorrow her son Theo, 11 years old, brilliant, and the only reason she got out of bed most mornings, was going to walk into Kingsley Preparatory Academy and find out if the scholarship he'd worked for, prayed for, cried over, was actually his. And there was one small problem on the acceptance letter. One line Odette had read 4 times, hoping it would change. A parent or guardian representative is required to attend the induction ceremony alongside the student. Odette didn't have a husband. She'd buried him 3 years ago, watched Theo stand at the graveside in a suit too big for him, watched her son become a boy who flinched every time another kid mentioned their dad. She had no father, no brother, no man in her life she could call at 10 o'clock at night and ask, "Can you pretend to be somebody you're not, just for one day, just so my son doesn't feel like the only kid in that room without a family standing behind him?" What she had was Ambrose Kingsley's kitchen, a mop, and a phone pressed against her ear. "Denise, I don't know what to do," she whispered, sitting on the back step where she thought no one could hear her. "They want a father figure there. Theo doesn't have one. I don't have one to give him." She didn't know that the man she'd worked for the last 2 years, the man everyone in town called cold, unreachable, a widower who'd shut his front door on the world after his wife died, had just come home early, and he was standing in the hallway, listening. Ambrose Kingsley had made his money the hard way. Steel, then real estate, then quiet investments nobody talked about because he preferred it that way. 54 years old, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, and about as warm as a bank vault, according to most people who'd met him. But nobody really knew him, not since his wife, Marguerite, died. He'd hired Odette 2 years ago because his last housekeeper quit, and because something about the way she carried herself, steady, proud, exhausted in a way she tried hard to hide, made him trust her without knowing why. He paid her more than she asked for. She never mentioned it. That was the kind of woman she was. He stood in that hallway now, keys still in his hand, listening to a grown woman quietly fall apart on the back step of his house. And something in his chest, something that had been locked since Marguerite's funeral, cracked open just slightly. "He's going to be the only one without anybody," Odette was saying, voice breaking now. "And he's already lost so much, Denise. I can't let him stand up there tomorrow and feel like he's missing something he can never get back." Ambrose set his keys down slowly, quietly, and made a decision that would change both of their lives. Odette ended the call, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and turned around to head back inside, straight into Ambrose Kingsley standing in the doorway. She froze. "Mr. Kingsley, I'm sorry. I was just finishing my..." "How long has your son been asking for a father?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Odette's mouth opened, then closed. "I heard you," Ambrose said, gently now. Nothing like the clipped, businesslike tone she was used to. On the phone. "I wasn't trying to. I heard. Odette's cheeks burned with humiliation. 2 years of never once complaining, never once letting her personal life bleed into this job. And now the one time she let her guard down, he'd caught every word. "It's not your concern, sir," she said, straightening her spine the way she always did when the world tried to knock her down. "I'll handle it, Odette." It was the first time he'd ever said her first name. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat, reluctantly. Across the same kitchen table she'd wiped down 1,000 times, but never once sat at. Ambrose poured 2 glasses of water, set one in front of her, and took the seat across from her, like it was the most natural thing in the world, though both of them knew it wasn't. "Tell me about the scholarship," he said. So she did. She told him about Theo, how he'd taught himself algebra from library books at 9 years old, how his 3rd-grade teacher had cried reading his essay about his father, how he'd stopped asking why his dad wasn't coming back and started asking instead what he needed to do to make his mother proud. She told him about Kingsley Prep, about the letter, about the line requiring a father or guardian figure to stand beside her son tomorrow at 3 o'clock, in front of the entire incoming class and their families. "I don't have anyone to ask," she admitted quietly. "My father passed when I was young. My brother's overseas with the military. I don't have—" She stopped herself. "I'll figure it out." Ambrose was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the words that would upend everything. "I'll go." Odette blinked. "Sir? Tomorrow. I'll stand with your son, if you'll have me." Odette laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Mr. Kingsley, you don't have to do that. I wasn't asking you. I would never." "I know you weren't asking me." His voice was steady, sure of itself, in a way she hadn't heard from him in 2 years. "I'm offering. You don't even know Theo. Then let tomorrow be the day I meet him." Odette searched his face for the catch, the price, the thing men like him always wanted in return. She'd learned the hard way that kindness with strings attached was worse than no kindness at all. But there was nothing in his eyes except something that looked, strangely, like grief being put to use for the first time in years. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this for us?" Ambrose looked down at his hands, hands that had built an empire and buried a wife and hadn't done anything that felt like this in longer than he could remember. "Because I had a son once," he said quietly. "Julian. He would have been about your Theo's age when he stopped, cleared his throat. "He didn't make it past his 2nd birthday. Heart condition. Marguerite and we couldn't have another after that." Odette's hand rose to her mouth. "I didn't know. Nobody does. I don't talk about it." He met her eyes. "But I'm asking you to let me do this one thing. Not because I feel sorry for you, Odette. Because I think your son deserves to walk into that room tomorrow knowing somebody showed up for him." The kitchen went silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Odette trying not to cry for the 2nd time that night. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, thank you." Neither of them knew yet that tomorrow wouldn't be the end of it. It would only be the beginning. The next afternoon, Odette stood outside Kingsley Preparatory Academy in the one good dress she owned, watching families in tailored suits and pearls stream past her toward the auditorium doors, and felt smaller than she had in years. Theo stood beside her in his new blazer, quiet, watching the other families too. She could see him doing the math, counting the dads, the granddads, the uncles, counting what he didn't have. "Mama," he said softly, It's okay if nobody comes with us. I don't need. Somebody's coming, Odette said, scanning the parking lot, praying she hadn't imagined the whole conversation the night before. He said he'd be here, and then a black car pulled up, and Ambrose Kingsley stepped out. He wasn't dressed like the billionaire the tabloids occasionally photographed at charity galas. He was dressed like a man who'd thought carefully about how to show up for a child who wasn't his. Sharp navy suit, no flash, no arrogance. Just presence. He walked straight to Theo first, crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "You must be Theo," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Ambrose. Your mother tells me you taught yourself algebra out of library books." Theo stared up at him, startled. "Yes, sir. That's more than I managed at your age." Ambrose's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "I hear congratulations are in order." For the first time in longer than Odette could remember, she watched her son's shoulders drop the weight they'd been carrying, watched him stand up just a little taller. "Are you ready to go in?" Ambrose asked, and offered his arm, not to Odette, but to Theo. Theo looked up at his mother, silently asking permission for something he didn't have words for yet. Odette nodded, throat too tight to speak, and the three of them walked through those doors together. The ceremony was everything Odette had hoped and feared it would be. Names called one by one, families standing, applauding, some crying, and when they called Theo Vaughn, Odette rose to her feet so fast her chair nearly tipped, clapping until her hands stung. But it was Ambrose standing beside her, tall, steady, clapping just as hard, that made the moment feel complete in a way Odette hadn't let herself imagine. Theo walked across that stage, accepted his scholarship folder, and did something nobody expected. He stopped at the podium microphone. "I just want to say thank you," he said, voice small but clear, "to my mom, who works 2 jobs so I could have this chance, and to Mr. Kingsley, who came today so I wouldn't be the only kid up here without someone." The room erupted into applause. Odette felt tears slide down her face freely now, not caring who saw. Beside her, Ambrose Kingsley, a man who hadn't cried in public since his wife's funeral, pressed a hand briefly over his mouth and looked away, blinking hard. Neither of them said anything as Theo walked off that stage. They didn't need to. Something had shifted in that auditorium, something neither of them was ready to name yet. The drive home was quiet, comfortable, in a way Odette hadn't expected. Theo fell asleep in the back seat of Ambrose's car, scholarship folder clutched to his chest like something precious. "Thank you," Odette said again, for what felt like the 100th time. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Ambrose said, eyes on the road. "That was the easiest afternoon I've had in 3 years." Odette glanced at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why us? You could have written a check, sent flowers, kept your distance, like you have with everyone since." She caught herself. Ambrose was quiet for a moment. "Since Marguerite," he finished for her, gently. "It's all right. You can say it." "Since Marguerite," Odette repeated softly. He pulled up to a red light and turned to look at her fully for the first time that evening. "Because for 2 years, I've watched you walk into my house every single day and give it more care than anyone's given anything of mine in a long time. I never asked how you were carrying so much on your own. I should have." Odette's breath caught. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Odette," he continued. "I'm not trying to fix what's broken in either of our lives, but I'd like to know your son better. And I'd like," He paused, choosing his words with visible care. I'd like to know you better too, if that's something you'd want. The light turned green. Neither of them moved for a second. I'd like that, Odette said finally. I think Theo would too. Theo Vaughn stood in the backyard of a house that used to belong to just one lonely man, laughing as he tried, badly, to teach Ambrose how to shoot a basketball. Odette watched from the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands, and felt something in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel since her husband passed. Something that felt dangerously, wonderfully, like hope. It hadn't happened overnight. There had been dinners, first, awkward, then easier. Homework help on Tuesdays that turned into every day. A father-son talk about a bully at school that Ambrose hadn't been asked to have, but gave anyway, because somebody needed to. Nights Odette caught Ambrose checking his phone anxiously until Theo texted that he'd finished his essay, or aced his test, or just wanted to say goodnight. Somewhere in those 6 months, Mr. Kingsley had quietly, carefully, become someone Theo reached for without thinking. And somewhere in those 6 months, Odette had stopped bracing herself for the other shoe to drop. Ambrose jogged up to the porch, out of breath, grinning in a way the tabloids had never once captured. Your son has a mean elbow for an 11-year-old, he said. He gets that from his father, Odette said, then paused, hearing her own words. Ambrose didn't correct her. He just reached for her hand, the way he had every evening for the past 2 months, and sat down beside her on the porch step. Odette, he said quietly, I know this isn't how either of us expected our lives to go. No, she agreed, it isn't. But I don't want to spend whatever time I have left pretending I don't know what I feel. He turned to face her fully. I love you, and I love that boy like he's my own. I'm not asking you to answer right now. I just needed you to know. Odette looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd overheard a broken prayer whispered on a back step and answered it without being asked twice. I love you too, she said softly. Both of you. Behind them, Theo whooped as the basketball finally sailed through the hoop, throwing his arms up like he'd won a championship. And for the first time in 3 long, lonely years, Odette Vaughn let herself believe that her family, the one she'd thought she'd lost for good, had simply been waiting for the right person to help her build it back. If this story moved you, tap that heart and drop a comment below. Tell us where you are watching from. We want to know how far our story travels. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.